The most painful thing a child can experience isn't punishment, it's being invisible. Some children are never hit, never screamed at. There are no dramatic scenes, no obvious wounds to point to later. From the outside, everything looks fine. The house is calm, the parents are present, there's food on the table and a roof overhead. But inside that child, something essential is missing. They speak and no one really listens. They feel something and no one notices. They achieve something small and beautiful and the room stays quiet. They cry sometimes, in the way children cry, openly, honestly, without armor, and they learn very quickly, no one is coming. This is the psychology of the ignored child. Emotional neglect doesn't announce itself. It doesn't leave marks. It doesn't create scenes that can be pointed to later and said, there, that is where it happened. It lives, instead, in what never occurred. The hug that wasn't given, the question that was never asked, the moment the child needed to be seen, and met instead with silence. The parent may have been there every single day, may have driven them to school, made their meals, paid their bills, kept the lights on, but they were somewhere else emotionally, unreachable, shut down, distracted, or simply never taught themselves how to truly connect with another person. And the child, the way children always do, made sense of it the only way they knew how. They decided it was something about them. This is the part that matters most. Because a child cannot look at a parent and think, you are emotionally unavailable. A child does not have that language, that distance, that capacity for that kind of objectivity. What a child thinks is simpler and far more damaging. They think, I am too much, or I am not enough, or what I feel doesn't matter here, or I should not need so much. And once a child believes that, once it settles into them not as a thought but as a feeling, as a truth about who they are, it becomes the lens through which they see everything that follows. So they adapt. Because children are extraordinarily good at adapting. It is how they survive. They stop reaching, not because the need for connection disappears, it never disappears, but because reaching and finding nothing is a specific kind of pain, and they learn to avoid it. They become quiet, easy, self-sufficient in ways that are too mature for their age. They stop bringing their inner world to the surface because the surface was never a safe place to bring it. They learn to need nothing, or at least to perform needing nothing. And for a while, this works. People around them use words like mature, independent, no trouble at all. No one sees that what looks like quiet strength is actually a child who stopped asking to be held, because asking and not being held was worse than not asking at all. That child grows up, and they carry everything quietly, carefully, invisibly into their adult life. They find themselves struggling to name what they feel, not because nothing is there, but because no one ever sat with them and helped them learn the language of their own inner world. Emotions were never discussed, never validated, never made safe, so they remain unnamed, unprocessed, circling somewhere beneath the surface where they are felt but cannot be reached. They feel like a burden the moment they ask for something, even small things, even reasonable things, even things that any person in any relationship has the right to ask for. The moment they need something from someone, there is a voice, quiet but insistent, that says, you are asking for too much. You are too much. You should not have needed that. So they give instead, endlessly, carefully. They become the person who shows up for everyone because being needed feels safer than needing. Because giving is something they can control. Because somewhere in them is still that child who learned that the only way to have a place in a room was to be useful in it. In love, this becomes its own kind of ache. The ignored child, grown up, does not always find their way to people who are warm and present and consistent. More often, not always, but often, they find their way to people who feel familiar. People who are a little distant, a little hard to reach. People who give just enough to keep them hoping, but never quite enough to make them feel truly safe. Not because they enjoy the pain, but because emotional distance feels like home. Consistency is unfamiliar. Genuine, steady, uncomplicated love, the kind that doesn't have to be earned or waited for or decoded, that feels suspicious, too good, like something that must be a mistake or something that will eventually be taken away. When someone truly shows up for them, calls when they say they will, notices when something is wrong, stays even when staying is inconvenient, the ignored child doesn't always know how to receive it. They may pull away. They may test it unconsciously to see when it will break. They may decide quietly that it cannot be real, because nothing that felt this safe was ever real before. And so they stay at a slight distance from their own relationships, present but not quite all the way in, loving people genuinely but from behind glass, where they can see everything and be touched by nothing. The body remembers too. This is something people don't always understand, that emotional neglect is not only a psychological experience, it is a physical one. Years of having emotions that were never met, never soothed, never regulated by a calm and present other, those years leave a mark on the nervous system, on the body's baseline sense of whether the world is safe. For the ignored child, calm does not always feel peaceful. It feels like the moment before something goes wrong. Stillness feels dangerous. Happiness feels fragile. Love feels like a debt that will eventually come due. And so they stay ready, always slightly braced, always half expecting the ground to shift, always one step removed from the present moment, because the present moment has never been a place where they fully felt they could rest. They call this being realistic, being careful, not getting their hopes up. But underneath that, the body is doing what it learned to do, protecting the child who never got protected. And yet, here is what the ignored child was never told, what no one sat down with them and said clearly in a way they could carry. You were not invisible because you didn't matter. You were invisible because the people around you had not learned to see, not you, not themselves, not anyone. Their silence was not a verdict on your value. It was the ceiling of their own capacity. Their absence was not proof that you were unworthy of attention. It was proof that they did not know how to give it. You made a very reasonable conclusion from very painful evidence, but the conclusion was wrong. The work, and it is work, slow and nonlinear and often uncomfortable, is not about going back. It is not about confronting the people who couldn't see you or waiting for an acknowledgement that may never come, or making someone finally understand what their silence cost you. The work is about learning gradually that you are allowed to take up space, that your feelings are not inconvenient, that your needs are not a burden, that asking for help is not weakness, It is the thing you were never allowed to do and always quietly, desperately needed to. It is about learning to notice when you are shrinking and choosing, just slightly, not to. It is about finding people who know how to see you. And then, the harder part, letting yourself be seen. Not performing okayness, not managing how much you take, not loving from behind glass. Just being there, fully, in your own life, for the first time. The ignored child learned, early, that the safest thing they could do was disappear. The healing is the slow, quiet, deeply uncomfortable process of learning that you were always worth staying for. That your presence, not your usefulness, not your performance, not how little you asked for, but just you, as you are, was always enough. You just needed someone to show you that. And now, perhaps, you are learning to show it to yourself. If this reached something in you, share it with someone who needed to hear it. And if you are just beginning to understand your own story, be patient with yourself. The child who learned to disappear deserves time to learn how to come back.